Good evening. You're tuned in to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Aaron Donaldson, and he's sitting in for Dave Frank this week. And we are talking the national news of the day, and there's plenty to talk about, even as Humboldt County is getting ready for our local and state elections. But we'll probably talk about that next week and the following week. Right now, we are going to talk about the biggest news of the day. Well, it's hard to say what the biggest news of the day, but big news of the day is inflation. It's the same news it's been for the past few months. We are at 40-year highs. It has dipped off a little bit. It's 8.3% over the past 12 months, whereas in March it was 8.5%. Last month, things had dropped a little bit with used cars, but new cars are still soaring. And we think well, I don't know about but economists think that probably the main reason it's dropped off a little bit was because gas prices temporarily dropped off due to a few factors, including the fact that the administration is pouring oil into the economy from the reserves, as we have discussed in the past on the show. But 8.3 is still real high. Eggs are something like 10% higher at this point. Other foods are even higher. It's taking a toll on people, and well, it doesn't look like there's any let up in sight. It doesn't look like that the supply chain issues are being resolved, and the war, as well as it might be going for Ukraine, and possibly even in the West, if you want to look at it that way, it is not doesn't look like it's going to be over anytime soon. So oil is still going to be at a premium. And it probably what reversed the last month was the fact that we're getting closer to summer season, getting into holiday. And it's still it's probably the biggest negative drag on Biden's approval rating. Not entirely clear that it's affecting other Democratic Party candidates, however, who seem to be polling well despite Biden's troubles with inflation. Of course, as we've discussed, there's very little any president can do about inflation. Federal Reserve is already upping rates. They upped it 0.25% the first time, 0.5% last week, and that may lead to some kind of control over the next few months, but it's not anything that's going to have an immediate impact. So it remains problematic for the Democrats. And of course, they are hoping that it will not extend into the fall. And they're hoping that, as usual, the voters have short memories and will be focused on, of course, other things such as the ending of the federal guarantee of choice, reproductive choice. There's so much to talk about in its political implications. And Aaron, I'm going to let you join in at this point.
I think you're right that it'll be interesting to see how much this spreads to, upcoming midterm elections and things like that. The Economist says that 1/5 of Americans say that inflation is the most important issue, and you rarely see all of us gather so heavily around a single issue. And we're, like you said, we're really starting to feel it. 8.5% within 1 year is a lot. The Economist article says, like you, that driving this moment of inflation are things that are primarily outside of Biden's control. He inherited very, very large stimulus spending in response to COVID-19, and he inherited a Fed that was participating in historic levels of what's called quantitative easing, which is basically just flooding the market with currency. And both of these were things that he cannot really control at his level. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted supply chains around the world. It is currently having a very, very large effect across the country of China. The war in Ukraine pretty much has grain exports shut down, has oil on the rise across Europe. And essentially, what they did in this article, which was really informative to me, is break it down across 5 different categories of the way that inflation is measured to say that they think it's probably here to stay, which means it's definitely going to impact the midterms, could have lasting impacts on political cycles. They measured 16 different components, and basically an average rating across all of these indicators. They find that Canada and the United States are leading the pack. They're some of the countries that, if you disperse all of the indicators that are possible and measure each individual indicator to see how it is inflating over time, this is where we're seeing, really, really high scores. Britain, Germany, Australia, France, all of these are, well over 50 in the 1 to 100 scale that they have, and only Japan is like seemingly riding out the storm fairly well. And all of these seem to suggest it's going to be fairly entrenched. It will be interesting to see whether the Fed rates lead to a drastic recession. What do you think the impacts are going to be as they start to raise these rates on everybody?
Yeah, they have to be very careful. They've got to be very careful to, try to have an impact on inflation without causing stagflation, which of course was what killed Carter's presidency back in. And it seems contradictory. How do you have stagflation? How can prices be going up when people are out of work and not able to buy things? And it does. It's always one of those things where when you talk about free market people, oh, we've got to leave things to the market because supply and demand fixes everything, but it doesn't in this case. They just charge more, and as long as they're profiting from it, they'll keep doing it, even if they're not selling everything. Even if a lot of food's going to waste, as long as they're making money, for instance. As to all the indicators, I've read a couple of articles about that too. But then, a year ago there were all these indicators that it wasn't going to happen. I'm always, reminded that economists have a lot of tools, but they really aren't, as a group, very predictive. So it could be that something happens that inflation drops even sooner than that. And a lot of people are saying that if the war was to end, and Ukraine was able to restore its food exportation and the rest, then that would be good. One of the things that oil companies may also be a factor is that oil companies may and want to start thinking about not pushing this because they're making profits right now, but electric cars are selling at record levels now. They can't even keep them on the lot. People are investing in these, and once consumers move to electric cars, they don't often move back. It's just like infrastructure. Once you've switched infrastructure to something that's sustainable and expensive, that's why they fight it every step of the way. Why Manchin is fighting it every step of the way, because even if they lose a little bit, they don't get it back. And so I'm wondering if OPEC might decide, oh my God, we could lose this, because electric cars right now are only about 2% of the car sales nationwide, but it's even worse than that in places like, or worse for them, like that in places like California, because we've got the infrastructure here, so people will buy it. They're maybe more hesitant in Montana where there aren't a whole lot of charging stations, but now that we're getting ranges of 250 miles and even 400 miles, it's still, it's still possibly, it's going to become more and more attractive to people, and especially as all the information is coming in about how there aren't that many maintenance costs. Certainly not in the motor. It's got one movable part, as they say, or sometimes maybe two or three, but it's not. It doesn't require a whole lot of work. So the point I'm trying to make is oil cartel, the OPEC, may make a decision at some point. Do we really want to drive people out of this market? We're making profit now, and if they decide to up production and lower the prices, that could have an impact on inflation, because obviously gasoline and oil are at the center of it. I'll let you close this one out.
It's a big part of it. One of the indicators they study is core inflation, as I'm sure you know, which includes like food and energy costs, and just
Mhm.
tries to get to like the nitty gritty gears that turn the economy. And these are the ones that they're looking at that they think are really high. I do think OPEC is going to make pretty sizable shifts to try to recapture some of the market that they are losing. That makes sense. But the United States can drive ourselves on shale if we have to, and we're showing that that's something that we will do. We're not gonna
Right.
go to an electric car if we don't have to right away, because we don't have them in a Humvee or an F-150 design quite yet. They're coming.
Not yet.
I think right. I think that the key for me that was interesting to look at was again that the three and things driving it are so different. COVID is a different problem than the war in Ukraine, and the United States' problem with just this influx of cash from quantitative easing to all of the bailout and stimulus that we've seen is a third, confluence. And I think that you see a feedback loop between wages and inflation that is going to continue to mutually amplify. So it will be interesting to watch and see where this goes.
All right. Well, there'll be plenty more to say on that. I do want to say, if you want to avoid some of the issues, if you buy local, it's not necessarily affected. The prices aren't going up that much. I mean, I'm amazed actually, some of the local produce and meat,
All
but
right.
more on that later.
Friends, I'm proud to greet you from Ukraine, from our capital city of Kyiv, a city that is under missile and airstrikes from Russian troops every day, but it doesn't give up. And I have the honor to greet you on behalf of the Ukrainian people, brave and freedom-loving people who for 8 years have been resisting the Russian aggression. Those who give their best sons and daughters to stop this full-scale Russian invasion. Right now, the destiny of our country is being decided. The destiny of our people.
All right, second topic, big news. We had the embassy, or the diplomatic mission in Ukraine has reopened. This is kind of an indication of the I don't want to say faith, but the confidence that the U.S. military has in security apparatus has in Ukraine's ability to defeat the Russian military at this point, or at least keep them relatively safe. Yes, Russia is lobbing missiles into all of the Western Ukraine and into Kiev and Odessa, but they can't get their troops there anywhere soon, and so they seem to be willing to take a chance here. I don't know how much of the embassy staff is returning. Of course, Jill Biden made her appearance. I've actually predicted, and I still predicted, that at some point, probably further in the election, Joe Biden is going to make a surprise appearance there. And it takes a little bit of a chance. It comes, and so they appear to be satisfied that Russia is not going to be able to take over the country, certainly, not at its current capacity, and may lose what it has. It is the front now. It's hard to tell what's going on the front. I kind of use a lot of open source things on Twitter and the rest, and sometimes the news that it delivers comes to the mainstream press later. But I'm just seeing, just like when in the battle outside Kyiv, it's really hard to watch. And as I've said on the show, I get really annoyed when they put like Highway to Hell on when you're showing tanks being blown up, when in fact what we're looking at is people dying, and we're talking conscripts and people that don't deserve to die. Nobody deserves to die, and the rest. But tank after tank after tank, due to javelins and NLAWs and all kinds of missiles, even their own self-made Ukrainian missiles, been very effective. We've discussed on the show a little bit about whether or not tanks are finally obsolete as warfare. They're just rolling coffins right now, especially the Russian ones, and the drones happening. And Ukraine has effective drones, but whatever they're doing for jamming, apparently the United States gave them electronic jamming. mean, it's taking the Russian Orlan drones are just dropping out of the sky right and left. And in fact, Ukrainians are actually able to take some of them and rebuild them, use them themselves, because apparently Russia doesn't have the same capability. The corruption in the Russian military, where money was supposed to be spent to upgrade and organize them, has really taken its toll. I mean, this is not the military of the Soviet era. Certainly, not. I mean, it's comparable to maybe what Stalin had when he tried to invade Finland. That's about it. But it improved. It is not. It is not what it was. They don't have any kind of air superiority. The Ukrainian planes are attacking Snake Island, which is the famous one. Their ships are going down. Their patrol boat seems to be devastated. I think 4 in the last couple of weeks. I could go on and on, but I'm going to pass this off to you because one indication that the Russians may be in retreat is they're blowing up bridges. Usually you do that when you don't want the other side getting to you.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a fallback tactic to start annihilating the infrastructure that an invading army would be relying upon. I think what we're seeing are like regional gains and losses. I think we're seeing Russia definitely sinking its teeth into the Donetsk, and that they're not going to be leaving there. Bridget Brink was appointed as the new ambassador to the Ukraine, a position that's been left open since Donald Trump decided it was no longer important to fill it, and that he'd rather shake down the prime minister of Ukraine in order to, maybe get some dirt on Joe Biden. Well, that didn't work, and now we're wrapped up in this fiasco. And what we see is that most of our ambassadors and State Department people have been working from Poland, and we're hearing not only that they're trying to move more of those people in, but also that just the mindset is starting to shift. Not very many people are going to be old enough to forget the Benghazi spectacle that we saw. Benghazi was a media circus that was very, very strategic. The W. Bush administration had over 80 such attacks, and none of those turned into this kind of media circus. And as a result of that and several other kind of spectacle moments, the State Department has what they describe in one foreign policy mag article as a kind of bunker mindset now, which is that they can't expose themselves to risk. And now they're starting to, see that it's actually a strategic posturing point to put more U.S. assets, if possible, on the ground in Kyiv, because that makes bigger risks for targets within that particular area. Putin is facing two choices: a humiliating defeat or a face-saving escalation. And one of the things that I think could be said is that rather than move like U.S. military assets into a place where they could get struck, this is the United States trying to move key diplomatic assets into a place to try to inhibit that kind of response. The Biden family is very much a headline-making thing, but when it comes to the State Department, I think what they're doing is kind of counter-posturing. And I think coupled with the links of the intelligence that we've been giving the Ukraine military, all sorts of information, coupled with the explicit promises made from NATO allies that they're going to be giving them more contemporary arms. Germany giving them anti-aircraft arms is a good example. Finland is going to be joining NATO. It would seem all of these seem to be like a kind of offensive that is less military. They're leaving the fighting to Ukraine, and this is the diplomatic apparatuses of the world trying to push back.
And this is my theory, and we'll see if it bears out. But for a long time, Zelensky was asking, "We need those planes. Please give us those planes, those Polish 29 MiGs." And then there was this story about, planes are being sent, and of course the military said, "Oh no, we're just sending them parts." But there's a very prominent theory that, yes, those 29 MiGs were sent in parts to be reconstructed, in Ukraine, which would make sense that they would be sent in that way anyway, so they don't get attacked. But because he's not pushing for them anymore, and he's not the type of person who would give up on something like that if he didn't have it. And yet now Ukraine's Air Force is attacking Russians all over the place. So that's, a big one. One of the other big things that's happening is the Russians are being pushed away from Kharkiv, which is up in the northeast, about, I think, 25 miles from the border. And Russians are being pushed into Russia, basically into Russia. And meanwhile, Ukraine is doing sorties, attacking oil refineries and other things in Russia itself. And Russia is sort of, they don't want to make a big deal about it because it shows that their air defenses are weak. I mean, it's a tricky one. And the reason this is significant is because it does look like now doing that and actually pushing Russia and the separatists out of Donetsk is going to be a massive undertaking. But you're just seeing tank after tank after tank, and the reports that the T-70s, which is their primary tank, they can't make any more of them because they don't have the industrial capacity because of the economic boycotts. It is entirely possible that they are pushed out of Donetsk, and Ukraine are even talking about attacking Crimea at this point if they retake Kherson, which is a big possibility. They've taken out now close to a dozen generals with intelligence help, which we try to say, well, we didn't tell them to go after the generals. We just let them know that's where the command center was.
Just told them where they were, like what they had for lunch. I mean,
yeah, it's so. And this is something that Biden is going to want to rely on. And it may be that even if the war isn't completely over, it's at a point where he can declare victory before the midterm elections. And that's a big thing in American politics. Does it trump inflation? I don't know. We haven't really had that before because Carter did not have military victories he could, rely on. He had a fiasco in a rescue attempt and, in Iran. So but it does seem like they're playing it smart. And what's going to happen with it politically? I don't know. I'll let you close this one out.
If any issue is going to trump inflation, it's going to be the next one that we're about to talk about. I think that this one is a big one for some segments of the American population, but generally it's one that's not affecting a whole lot of people at the polls. I do think that while it's exciting to see the gains that you're describing in Kharkiv, CBS News is reporting that several cities around there have fallen in a kind of domino fashion. And Russia is resolute, and there's a large industrial population in that region that is not super recent. They're Soviet era, so I think it's going to be a long, tough fight. That Putin's the kind of guy to have a couple like extra nasty tricks up his sleeve that they can escalate to. So I'm concerned. Yeah. I hope it gets better.
Yeah, well, I hope it's not the crazy one, but we'll see.
Right.
All right, that takes us to our next topic. Last week, we discussed the leak of the Alito opinion, and what's kind of amazing isn't so much, there are additional leaks that none of the five are changing their mind in supporting Alito. Alito's in hiding. He canceled public appearances and the like, but this was, anyways, it has kind of turned a lot of politics on its head right now. The Republicans are more upset about the fact that there is a leak, but what's amazing is that the leaks are continuing. This has never happened in Supreme Court history, certainly not in recent history, where this type of thing has happened. And are they going to be able to catch up with the leakers? Who knows? But it doesn't really even matter because it is out, and this has done something that the Republicans didn't want. It has basically given energy to Democrats. They've broken records fundraising, and it's too early to tell if there are going to be major shifts in polls. It's going to depend, but if Democrats turn out, that's all they need. And women are certainly angered over this. And probably something else that didn't is, I think Senator McConnell, in an interview last week, made an uncharacteristically amateur mistake. In which case he was asked, well, will you, if you retake Congress, will you pass a national ban of abortion? That affects all of the states. Now, there's a big question here. Everybody's talking about wanting to legislate one way or another, create a national ban or codify Roe v. Wade. You would think if the decision was if it got to the Supreme Court and they were consistent, that either one of those would be struck down as a violation of 10th Amendment, interference with states' rights, since that's what the overturning of Roe v. Wade is based on. Let states decide, right? But with this Supreme Court majority, I don't trust anything. I don't think they don't even care as to whether or not they're consistent. And so when McConnell has said this, it's got even more people worried, because even women and Democrats who felt like they're safe in states like California, which has privacy right in our Constitution, passed in 1974 in the wake of Roe v. Wade to make sure that it stayed here. If that's overridden, and it's upheld by the Supreme Court as some type of right, that they have, I'm going to pass this on to you. But there's like news coming out of not New Orleans, Louisiana, and Mississippi about new legislation that they want to pass, establishing rights at conception, right? It just goes against science. Something like 6 out of 7 conceptions are naturally aborted, right? So what does that say about, if you believe in God, what does it say? They kill 6 out of 7 of the human beings before they can even start cell splitting, right? Anyways, it's this is the politics of it. And McConnell has said, but I won't change the filibuster. I won't get rid of the filibuster to pass it. And that's making nobody happy. The Democrats don't like the idea that it will even be passed, and Republicans don't like the fact that there's kind of that he's not willing to change the filibuster, and which would just make it performative and not anything meaningful. This is going to be such a cluster F of political situations. Republicans absolutely didn't want to see this happen. Aaron.
I think that it's really exceptional and worth mentioning that such a landmark moment that is so threatening to such a large percentage of the population is seen as like on par with things like inflation and stuff like that. Like Roe v. Wade was necessary. It was retributive to generations of trying to stop women and people who can give birth from having just basic access to your everyday health care. The evidence is overwhelming. Prohibiting abortions does not protect women. Allowing women to have access to reproductive rights and health care and allowing people who can get pregnant to these kinds of things protects them. It protects families. If you care about the economy more than those things, then it protects the economy. I think for any man or boy that considers themselves an ally, or if you like the patriarchy card, for any man or boy that considers themselves a protector of women, it is unconscionable that we are not absolutely outraged by this leak, and that more people are not going to places of protest to state that there is genuine concern. The American Legislative Exchange Committee is notorious for their ability to divide and conquer at the state level. Politico says 23 states have laws restricting or completely banning abortion ready to roll. This impacts 58% of American people. That's 40 million people, women and people who can become pregnant. 35% of the American population are in states broadly supportive of such rights. 16 states and D.C. have laws protecting access, whereas 23 states are ready to go to roll it back. And if you look at the map of the country, it's just a cleave right down the middle of the country, with some of the coastal areas and a couple of other holdouts that'll probably flip fairly quickly being the exceptions. And when you look again at the evidence, I am a debate coach. I've coached, nationally competitive collegiate debate for 20 years. The evidence here is very misleading. The information that is given out on medical cards, there was a study that was put out by Rutgers one year that found that something like what was it? It was the Informed Consent Project at Rutgers estimated that 1/3 of statements in patient materials distributed in 24 states is medically inaccurate. It is inaccurate. It states women can die from abortion, but women can die from a tonsillectomy too. And the risks of having a child are far greater than the risks of having an abortion. Far greater. But these materials don't say that. They have them look at images of ultrasounds as though that there's evidence to support that matters, but it doesn't. These women know, and these people know the consequence. So I think that this is the one that hopefully is going to make a difference. I have thought the Democrats are walking to death's door for these coming midterms, and if there is a silver lining on this just really terrifying cloud, it is that this could galvanize enough people to show up and make a difference.
Definitely it has galvanized. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The question is, has everybody really woken up to the fact that it will actually happen? There's people out there who may still be in denial about it because it hasn't happened over the years. Every time we've gotten worried about it, Souter, when he was appointed, the stealth candidate, back, Justice Souter, it was supposed to be anti-abortion, and he came out and was turned out to be actually quite liberal. And everybody's saying, but your decisions in New Hampshire were so conservative later on. He said, well, that's because New Hampshire's law is conservative. I had to enforce conservative law, but nationally, there is definitely a right to privacy and ought to be. So, it's so every time we say it's going to happen, people say it's going to happen. It doesn't happen, and a lot of people are probably still in denial about that. So it's one thing to have a leaked report with a very radically, and I want to say that radically worded document. But I have a feeling when the real thing happens, and then all of a sudden there's all these horror stories of women being prosecuted because they left Texas to get an abortion and couldn't return home because they'd be prosecuted, right?
This affects boys and men too. Like, this greatly affects people who can get other people pregnant. And I think a lot of men and boys are not making that calculation when they sit down and think about the consequences of this act. I think that, like, a good example is, like, 19 states have banned access to pills, abortion pills, or even mailing such pills across state lines. They are prohibiting, with like civil and criminal laws, even supporting abortion. This is not about women's health. This is not about women's well-being. This is about taking the life of clumps of cells and calling that a person and saying that that is more important than the person, the actual person that is, carrying that clump of cells to gestational life. And historically, this debate has been tragic. It's getting very, very grim. And I really do hope enough, like, not just women, but also men and boys out there see this as a catastrophic loss. Roe v. Wade, I understand people that feel like Roe v. Wade was, like, maybe not enough. We should have had legislative enshrinement and things like that. But what you just said is true. For a very, very long time, Roe v. Wade protected people and did exactly what it was supposed to do. And now that it's weakening, I think there's genuine cause for alarm.
Men should also consider the fact that the average child support payments take up 1/4 of their income. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah, they got to remember
if you've
that.
got a young boy who can get a young woman or other person pregnant, this impacts you.
Okay, we are this section. We're talking about the Pennsylvania primary, another one of those primaries that is basically essential to understand in terms of national politics. The biggest issue is the Senate, but there are some other races going on there. But it is happening, I believe, next Tuesday, and we have a lot of very interesting candidates. There were a number of candidates, just like in Ohio, that were vying for Donald Trump's endorsement. The one who eventually landed it was the celebrity guy that he seems to lean towards that. Football players, book writers, even though he doesn't read books. And in this case, Dr. Oz, who there's questions as to whether or not he's even legally a resident of Pennsylvania. I mean, there's possibly going to be a lawsuit about that. And so he looks like he is probably going to be the one to win, although it's not guaranteed. Everything is really close in the polls. On the Democrat side, also something very interesting has happened, because normally, and what has been happening of late is the left has not been very successful in winning a lot of primaries lately. But John Fetterman was a Bernie Sanders supporter, very progressive on a lot of issues, unapologetically, and is going in with that working class appeal. He's a big guy. He's got, a lot of charisma. And he is outdoing Connor Lamb, who I believe came from the Pittsburgh area, is more of a moderate, kind of like a Tim Ryan in Ohio, or, I don't want to say Manchin, but maybe more like, what's his name up in Montana, the farmer. Yeah, kind of like that, or Kelly in Arizona. Sort of a moderate that's faithfully Democratic and pro-choice and all of that, but he was expected to win, and he just was not catching up in the polls. And finally, Democratic mainstreamers and DNC types are kind of giving in to the fact that Fetterman is probably going to win this thing, and maybe he's got the best chance, ironically, of defeating Dr. Oz or whomever the Republicans put up. We also have a governor's race to talk about, but why don't we start with the Senate?
I really appreciate you bringing up John Tester. One of my debate buddies was on his core team that got him elected, and I have lots of problems with him, but I'm, a fan. I think that when it comes to the GOP Senate race, it's fascinating. David McCormick and Mehmet Oz have just been doing like scorched earth against each other. And about a week ago, the world learned of Kathy Barnett. And Kathy Barnett is polling very, very strong. And while you say it's like kind of looking like Oz has a large lead, I saw numbers recently saying like 40% of Republicans in Pennsylvania are still undecided. And that is huge. That is very, very, very high. And that tells us that those poll numbers that we have may be far less, reliable than even they are in the past if there's such a large swing. And a lot of undecided voters may not even vote, so they may not have that big of an impact on it. But I do think that Kathy Barnett's backstory is really fascinating. She got a $2 million ad buy by the Club for Growth, which is, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, long affiliated with fiscal policy in the state and long a kind of local kingmaker when it comes to just swinging last-minute efforts. They gave her a huge ad buy, and I don't know if you saw any of it, but she describes her background as being from a one-pig Alabama farm. She's an Army Reserve black woman who has a book about how Democrats have failed the black people of her state and of the United States. She's a former adjunct professor, which got my attention. She's a mom of two kids that she's homeschooled, and she calls Newt Gingrich Yoda. Like, for me, this is the person that I've been waiting for to potentially take over the reins of the GOP itself, because I think she might be able to even out-Trump Trump. I don't know if she's going to win, but if she does, like, look out. She's going to have either way, I think she'll have a bright future. But I'm watching for her name on Tuesday. If she's even if she's second, I think that would be a huge, huge win for her at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might be watching the future. Again, I've looked at most of the candidates. It's actually difficult for me to see how any of them can beat Fetterman at this point. Fetterman does not seem to be being dragged down by the national polls or anything. He seems to have be popular up in the working class areas, in Pittsburgh and everywhere, and he's definitely popular in Philadelphia. Has the support of the suburban women who are said to be the ones who basically handed Pennsylvania to Biden and the rest, and they're energized. He's energized. Right. People like him. Some of the left, of course, but then there's always criticism for the left. Nobody's the left kind of demands a level of purity that isn't necessarily seen on the other side. I mean, Trump demands purity, but the only purity he demands is fealty to him, right? So. I mean, it's going to be a fascinating race to watch, but and I want to say something quickly about the governor's race before we run out of time, because the Republicans are definitely scared that Mr. Mastriano is going to win. He's kind of extreme and out there, but Donald Trump doesn't like I think it was Shapiro is the attorney general, who's probably the best one for the Republicans to run, but he doesn't like him because he refused to prosecute, refused to jump onto the big lie and was kind of adamant about it. So he's being punished. So Republicans are trying to find some way to see if, McSwain or any of the others could have a chance. But it's looking like they've got a problem there too. I'm not even sure who the Democrat is in that race. I just know that the Republicans are really worried that whoever the Democrat is going to lose to Mastriano.
Yeah, they think he's unelectable. He's a very flagrant big steel guy, and the Pennsylvania Republicans, to their credit, have been some of the people that have tried to push back within the party as much as possible, not a lot. And I think that in each case, it's like Trump's support might get them, voters. It might get them headlines. It might get them, all of that. But whether or not it's going to defeat a Democrat is still very much up in the air. We haven't seen that tested in super competitive spaces yet in a way that gives anyone in the Republican Party any real confidence, I don't think.
Yeah. I don't either. It's going to be very interesting. And I'm looking at this too, the poll in the Senate race between Oz and Barnett and Barletta. They're all pretty close. Anything could happen there. I believe, it's just a difference of points, and they're all down in their 20s,
Right. With like 40% undecided. I mean,
yeah.
Waldo
so anything can happen
at this point. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so we don't know what's going to happen, but it does seem to be certain on the Democrat side in terms of the Senate race. Fetterman is looking good, and he's just waiting for somebody to blow out of the water there. Pennsylvania, of course, is one of those purple states that's really essential for the Democrats. Yeah, and
historic battleground state.
But right, and of course this is a pickup, a potential pickup for the Democrats. They could actually, they could lose the House and actually gain seats in the Senate this election, because there's really only a couple of places where the Democrats are vulnerable. And I question their vulnerability. There's in Nevada, there's Castellano is vulnerable. Kelly, I don't think he's vulnerable, and I think Warnock is going to beat Herschel Walker. So it just. But Trump, it was 50-50 yesterday. The groper in Nebraska lost his primary race, but he did have a big win in West Virginia, where there were two set apart. A Trumper who's ready to go with the big lie defeated the mainstream Republican there. I'll let you close out.
I do think Fetterman's a fun one to watch, and I think it's interesting because, he did not have the Democrat support the last time that he was running. He's maintained his presence within the party, kind of like you. I think he looks like the kind of guy who can eat a handful of screws for lunch. He's just got this, again, he speaks to the blue-collar, tough guy kind of crowd, and if you want to make inroads in moderate circles, then that's a good bet. And yet he's a pretty progressive candidate in terms of his policy bona fides, and I think that's really important on the left right now. I do think that's how they win.
Single payer, national healthcare.
It hurts them with their funding. They need to take the pharma money. They need to take all that in order to get the the buys for all the ads and everything. But as far as the voters are concerned, that's what we want.
All right. Well, we'll be reporting on that next week. We'll probably know the results. Meanwhile, last topic.
The ship is now resting exactly where it landed 2 hours ago, and so far there is no sign of life from inside it. Troops have been rushed across the Potomac River from Fort Myer and have thrown a cordon around the ship. They're supported by tanks, artillery, and machine guns. Behind the police lines, there's a huge crowd of curiosity seekers. The Army has taken every precaution to meet any emergency which may develop. Every eye, every weapon is trained on the ship. It's been that way for 2 hours, and the tension is just beginning. Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen. I think something is happening.
We have come to visit you in peace and with goodwill.
Okay, final topic. We are going to talk about flying saucers, little green men. This has been actually kind of a growing controversy. Now, not a controversy necessarily that there are cover-ups at Area 51 with aliens that have been there since 1950s, preferring strawberry yogurt or whatever it was that Mike Farrell represented in that crazy documentary a couple decades back. But definitely, there are some phenomenon that have been unfilmed, and are not easily explained by the technology that we have. Even things that seem to be standing still or acting differently, and not like drones, even that have been turning up, and people want explanations. And it has become a strong enough issue that that now Congress is pushing for it, and they're not satisfied with the reports. They report more of what they're calling UFO or unexplained incidents that are happening, but they're not spending time trying to come up with explanations, and that's what people want. They want to know what the explanations are. Some of the congressmen are talking about whether or not this is a national security risk. Is there some foreign country experimenting with technology, and that we don't understand? At any rate, Adam Schiff is chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and we all know him from the impeachments. Says the purpose of this hearing is to give public an opportunity to hear directly from subject matter experts and leaders in the intelligence community on one of the greatest mysteries of our time, and to break the cycle of excessive secrecy and speculation with truth and transparency. They want to know what's going on, or at least what the thought processes are, and the military's been really cagey about it for decades, actually. And I think it's reached a point, not necessarily that people in Congress are saying you're hiding little green men, but you're just not being forthright. These are interesting phenomenon. We need to know what they are, and if you're going to tell us it's a matter of national security, we need a little bit more of an explanation before you're telling this. Or the question is it the United States experimenting with technology that they don't want to reveal? Is there, or is there something else happening, or are they just being secretive because that's what they do? We don't know. But at any rate, UFOs, which, by the way, when they say, oh, it's a UFO, if it's UFO stands for unidentified flying object. So if you haven't identified it, it's a UFO. It does not mean it's a flying saucer or an alien ship. But at any rate, there are some very earthly reasons why this is a big deal, and it is becoming something of a big deal. Aaron.
Yeah, before we hit record, I said they're running from their own vocabulary because they were the ones that came up. The Air Force is the ones quoting people that came up with the term flying saucer. And then later they didn't like how that sounded. It was getting too much media attention. This is in the 50s, in the Project Blue Book days. So they come up with UFOs. And now, as of the 2020s, they're calling them UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. I have a book about alienhood rhetoric that I'm working on with Kendall Hunt that's hopefully going to be coming out at the end of the year. I'm excited. It's mostly about cinema, but there's definitely components that are in there wondering about how we can have this information, that there are definitely vehicles, whether they're terrestrial or otherwise, that are capable of doing things that no other vehicle that we can even conceive of can do. And we know this. Airplane pilots have told us this. These are commercial airplane pilots, military airplane pilots, heads of state, like you pick whatever you want for the credentialed witness, and if you go back and look, you'll see that you have people saying that there's all sorts of stuff. And most famously in 2017, they declassified about 1,500 pages of information, and about the same time, we leaked some very famous videos now of some things turning and doing all sorts of other stuff. My joke at the time was like, Donald Trump gets elected president, UFOs declassified. Good job, Illuminati. This is how you bury the lead right there. But, there's a lot on this. I'm very interested to see how they continue to try to talk about it. There's 144 events within those 1,500 pages. One of those is explained. 18 events involve what they call unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics, potentially demonstrating unknown technical capabilities. 11 of these events had dangerous near misses. They all had craft that were detected by radar, infrared, electro-optical, and sight, but we can't rule out that this is a kind of like electronic warfare that is potentially taking place, and a kind of spoofing. Sometimes technology creates glitches. Optical illusions are nothing new. But that's not to say that Obama in May went on the Late Late Show and said that there are things in our skies and we don't know whose they are, and they can do things that we cannot explain. And I think that is not only a national security risk, but just something that the American public deserves an explanation about. And, it's often covered in a way that has to like apologize for its own existence, which I think is really powerful in terms of like the rhetoric of like COINTELPRO and the CIA historically trying to make certain topics taboo. It's an interesting one. It'll be
Well,
very interesting to see what the new report says.
let me ask you a question too, because a lot of it comes down to, well, if these were aliens, would they let us see these things?
Right. Yeah.
Wouldn't they be more clever about it and be able to do it? Well, of course, they can make mistakes like any of us. There's also the old thing from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that maybe these are teenagers or frat boys playing pranks on
Frat aliens.
the simple Earthlings, and the rest. But I mean, what if it is alien life, and what type of political and cultural impact would that have? There was a Star Trek episode, for instance, where they decided to keep it secret, even when they went to a similar planet, just because they didn't think that their culture was ready to accept that there were beings on other planets, and that would be a huge thing. It would undo theologies and everything. And there's been plenty of science fiction written about that, but here we are.
Yeah. I have so much on this, and we have so little time. But
Yeah.
What I would say is that I do think that, it makes a lot of sense that if there are extraterrestrial craft that have crashed or anything like that, like there are conglomerates that would absolutely monopolize and proprietize that information and do
Sure.
everything they could to keep that under wraps. I think that if there are aliens out there and they're able to get here, there's a great deal of fear that like broadcasting our location invites a kind of
You're
attack.
right.
We did a bunch of research on this when I was at Oregon. I did a bunch more for my dissertation. I'm doing more of it now for this book. Most scientists think that if there are aliens that can get here, they would regard us very much like a krill would regard a whale. Like we just
Right.
cannot even conceive that they exist, and they're kind of indifferent to us. The
Right.
odds are very good that evolution selects for wisdom. There's a paper called the NASA Astro Quarantine Hypothesis. It's in the astrobiology magazine that NASA puts out. And there's a bunch of planetary astrobiologists that have multiple arguments that symbiosis, like the stuff that in your gut survives, you don't even know it exists, and it doesn't know that you exist, but when you thrive, it thrives. That is what evolution wants. The
Yeah.
lone wolf is the most vulnerable thing in the forest. A teenage deer can kill a lone wolf, but if it is a pack, it's a whole different conversation.
Sure.
And
In other words, they survived to get that far. Therefore, they must have acquired some wisdom and aren't going to be conquering or whatever. Maybe kind of a Trekkian prime directive of non-interference to let us, get to.
Interestingly enough, that concept itself is kind of patriarchal because it assumes a connected position, and more we're seeing it's like, listen, we're embedded. We're all embedded in the cosmos. I really like the line in Contact, one of my favorite movies, a book by Carl Sagan, and he says, after all of this searching, the only thing that makes the vastness bearable is each other.
Right.
And that's what symbiosis is. The only thing that makes the vastness bearable is each other. Those wolves are going to cuddle to survive, and if they don't, they're going to die. And you may not like the other wolf, and you're going to kick them and bite them and nip them, but without them, you're dead. And we know that. And the universe is just a big cosmological ecology, potentially. And I, for one, wouldn't be super afraid, but I'm not super pumped either, because these ships are doing things, and I want to know what they are and why people are keeping them a secret. What's going on?
Yeah. I mean, my guess is they're just studying us, like you would. And it might be that they stay separate for a while just because we're teenagers, we're in our adolescence, and throwing tantrums. So they just
District 9 is a good look at this. Yeah, we end up capturing a bunch of them and holding them in a prison camp because we're afraid of them. That's District 9's take. Yeah.
I mean, like you said, there is so much to talk about, but we are out of time and with nowhere near
More Star Trek next time. More Star Trek on Redwood Wonk.
All right. That takes us to our last section. This is where we provide our predictions about what will happen in the future, politically speaking. So far, I'm doing okay, but not as good as I would like to have in my predictions. But Aaron, what have you got?
Well, I'm not keeping track of my score, so I'm going to say I'm doing great. I'm taking big long ball shots. This time I'm going to be bold. I think Kathy Barnett's going to win. I think Kathy
Wow.
Barnett is going to win. That's my big bold prediction. And if she doesn't, my backup prediction, she's going to get some big position in the Republican Party. She's
Right.
going to be given a response to the State of the Union. She's definitely going to be given CPAC speeches that we hear.
Do you
Kathy
think she's the
Barnett is a
best
name
chance
to
to beat
watch.
Fetterman?
I don't know if she can beat Fetterman, but I think she's a good chance to beat Fetterman. Like, again, you got to go multiple rounds in politics,
Yeah.
and right now she's a new face. But what I'm seeing makes me think that she could be the future of Trumpism in a lot of ways. So we'll see.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to make a prediction. Florida today issued a decision that basically overturned the northern Florida portion of their redistricting map. First, it hasn't happened much in Republican states. When we went into this, after most of the maps had been finished, there were 17, I counted, Republican gerrymandered states and 3 Democratic, New York, Maryland, and Illinois. And New York and Maryland, they were overturned, although the Maryland's map doesn't look much different, quite frankly. But what the only states that have overturned their own gerrymandering was in Ohio. And the Supreme Court kept overturning it, but the Republicans have basically run out of the clock by just putting the same maps up over and over again. And then all of a sudden, a federal court came in and said, okay, you can't overturn them anymore because we got the election coming, right? So completely rewarding absolute disobedience of the law. Well, I have my prediction is that DeSantis is going to do the same thing. He's going to appeal it and then try to take it to federal court and say, okay, well, we'll decide all this later, but for this election, we're stuck with this map. Gee golly! But the map does discriminate against black voters, and in the old days of the the Voting Rights Act, this would have been overturned in a heartbeat. And but with this SCOTUS and with the Republican judges, I think it's going to come down to 17 Republican gerrymandered states and maybe 2, because I think Democrats seem to have gotten away with it too. But we will see, and more news about that in the coming weeks. But anyway, I want to thank you. Thank you, Aaron, for stepping in. Dave will be back next week. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.